ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to Truth Report Live, a weekly show that we do here on a Tuesday at 12 p.m. where we cover the week that was and the week that's going to be. Although with this episode, it is going to be the last live stream for the year of 2025. So we'll see you again in January 2026. Having said that, though, ladies and gentlemen, my panelists with me today are the amazing Chris Wyatt, all the way from the US of A. As you guys can see, it's almost 5 a.m. on his side. So, Chris, thank you so much for waking up early and being part of this live stream. And of course, we have Rob Hersov right below me. And of course, the amazing Morning Shot, aka Byron Shepherd, has joined as well. Guys, gents, how are you guys doing?
Yeah, I can't complain. From PE, I suppose, it's PE.
So it's raining in Cape Town. It's summer rain in Cape Town, and I'm playing golf in an hour. So not too bad.
Well, it's -9 Celsius in central Pennsylvania, and it's not raining, and it's not PE. So all things being equal, pretty damn good.
Awesome. So those of you that are joining us now, please don't be shy. Comment below if you're watching on X or Facebook. We will see those comments and we can bring them up. If you got any questions for our guests, any topics you want us to discuss, please drop them in the live stream. We also have our own topics that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But before we do, don't forget that you can also support Truth Report by giving a super chat, super thanks, whatever you want to call them. Some of us call them salsa chats on some of these live streams. So if you want to support Truth Report, you want to support independent media, please do drop a super chat. And of course, we can't ignore the super chats that come in. So we will obviously give thanks. And if you have a question, we will address it. Having said that, gents, let's get into the first topic of today. Over the weekend, news broke that Witness D has been assassinated. Byron, let's start with your thoughts on that one. I don't know if you've been following the Malanga Commission, but this was a witness.
My video for today is singularly just on this topic, and my crux of it. I'm not like Rob usually, so I don't usually make like should we say political statements. Rob makes political statements.
What's like ANC?
Yeah, like that. So I usually kind of just regurgitate the news with my own, I suppose, blend. But actually today I changed that, and I did actually have some political comments or views that I gave to the audience. And my view essentially was for the Republic to survive, the ANC must die. I don't see how I think the assassination of Witness D, aka Marius, has brought the ANC to a new low. And listening to the funeral of his wife, I couldn't help but get similar vibes to what we saw following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, where she said that she really struggled to let go. The kids had watched him die. Like I had deja vu of Charlie Kirk at her funeral. So I think that the event, the assassination, is going to be far more important than I think even the ANC understands.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, what do you have to say about this assassination?
The blood is on Cyril's hands. That spineless Cyril Ramaphosa, who is only good at reading the news during COVID and organizing commissions and national dialogues, knows exactly what's going on, knows who's guilty, and the only reason he hasn't said anything is because he's complicit. And he has blood on his hands. And every other member of cabinet, ANC member of cabinet, is guilty of something, but they know what Cyril's guilty of, and they're caught in this kind of, this Gordian knot of evil. Anyone still voting and supporting for the ANC is either evil, complicit, or a moron. Pick your category.
Chris, I'm going to come to you with this one as well, because like you know a lot about South Africa. You've worked in the U.S. Army, you're a colonel. Do you have any behind the scenes information or intel? I know that you're not currently involved with the army and stuff like that, but what I mean is like maybe you could shed some light onto the ideologies of the ANC and like how assassinations like this are not uncommon, and it's not the first time, and I don't think it'll be the last time.
Well, yes, no, I'm not serving now, and even if I had any secrets from that, I couldn't disclose them. Those have to go to the grave with me, So, but I can discuss the things that research openly and the conclusions I reach and the history I know. So, this is not exactly new ground for the ANC. I'm not saying the ANC is behind this, but I'm talking about assassinations. I mean, people forget the People's War and what happened there in the KwaZulu-Natal in particular, when ANC operatives assassinated 25,000 young IFP and Kata Freedom Party leaders back in the 1980s. And early 90s, especially. This was, if there was going to be a civil war in South Africa, it wasn't AWB. They were exposed to Bophuthatswana in the embarrassing situation, but it was going to be these guys in the ANC killing people left and right. But let's jump forward. Since 2005, in the intelligence community initially, I was warning people about just how dangerous South Africa become because the assassination of Brett Kebble. If Brett Kebble, who is deeply tied to the ANC, could be killed in such a brazen fashion in Johannesburg, then it's not safe for anyone, and that's played out over the years. Now, with the situation here, when the media just touched on it but barely covered the assassination of Babito Deokaran, I covered that extensively and talked about the hazard to whistleblowers and to. I mean, the woman just found an anomaly and she reported it, and it cost her life. And I talked about the inadequacy of witness protection. There is no such thing as witness protection in South Africa. They may have a program, but no one's being protected. And when the Mhlanga Commission started, I said, oh, my goodness, I wonder if these people are outside the country and testifying from far away because they're not safe. And sure enough, they're not safe. And Rob says there's blood on the ANC's hands. Well, there's blood on the ineptitude, the incompetence, or the malfeasance of the ANC, of crime intelligence, of national intelligence. The entire thing is a crap show. But it's intentional. Gangsters run South Africa. They run the taxi industry. They run the construction industry as a mafia. And now you see it playing out in the police. The gangsters apparently run the senior leaders of the police, at least enough of them that you have the situation. This is heartbreaking. Nobody's safe in South Africa. Nobody is. I'm sorry to tell you that if you didn't realize that, folks.
Yeah, so look, if you look at some of what's going on in South Africa, so Cyril did a speech yesterday, which I think was the biggest waste of time he's ever done, because Cyril's speeches all sound the same. And during that speech, he lamented, as did Fikile Mbalula, the decline of the ANC and the Republic, and they tie it specifically to the youth. They say that the youth are specifically the ones in South Africa that are the least impressed with the ANC. But you see, these old fart asses don't really seem to understand something, and that is because to the older generation, the ANC can utilize the idea of apartheid. They can say, well, we fought this war, we ended apartheid, blah, 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 and they still rely on the apartheid ticket. But to a young individual, a born free, the apartheid ticket doesn't mean anything. What actually means anything is the material circumstances in life. Do they have a job? Do they have a better life now than their parents in some instances? And in some instances, they can't say that because actually they may have an equal or worse life than their parents. I mean, that's generally how most kids assess whether or not they've improved in the quality of their life. They check their parents, So the ANC doesn't really seem to understand that the reason the youth are so lackadaisical when it comes through to the ANC is because the ANC hasn't improved their lives. Maybe they did their parents. I'm not sure to say. But the reality is Witness D is also important because what it's shown is that when we try hold the ANC to account, the ANC's natural raison d'etre is to silence dissent. And that's what I think everybody's taking from the murder. If you stand up and you're a whistleblower of any variety and you attempt to hold the governing party to account, they will slaughter you. And you could categorically see this on stage. Witness D, apparently, according to all the rumors, or we don't really know, we can't ask him because he's dead now, conveniently. You can't ask him, what did he think of this? But the rumors are he wanted protective custody. The government says they offered it to him, but he declined it. Which is it? Did he want it or not? Doesn't matter. What we do know is that he said that the testimony he would give would result in the death of him. And he said that if he wasn't held to be anonymous, if his identity wasn't to remain secret, he said, they will kill me. And yet you took the position to expose the corruption that is the ANC, and it cost him his life. Now, that in itself is important to understand, because he effectively became a martyr, and a self-professed martyr. Everybody knew this would be the outcome, and it was. Usually, most governments are smart enough to understand, if an individual can become a martyr, you don't kill him. Maybe you discredit him, but you don't kill and create a martyr. But what this shows is that when it comes through to the ANC itself, the ANC is so blasé, so lackadaisical, so I don't really care, that they will continue with this regardless. And that fundamentally is the issue. The ANC feels at this point in time that they can continue to use the same rhetoric that they've always used, and they can never, ever be held to account. And that's why this is different, because I think for the first time, the general perception in the Republic is we want to hold the ANC to account.
Well, you touched on two things there, Rob. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you missed one thing. They're so corrupt.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
They are corrupt to the core. And I think that, if the municipals swing massively away from the ANC and towards the likes of the DA, Patriotic Alliance and others, it'll be mainly on service delivery. The fact that they are incompetent. But what's being proven daily now with the Masanga Commission is how corrupt and evil they are. And, I tell the story a few times. The State Department asked me a question 2 years ago. US State Department, is the ANC malevolent, evil, or corrupt, stupid? And I asked them why. Why are they asking me? The guy said to me, well, there's the fisheries bill, the AGOA, and either they just are too stupid to fill out the forms, or they're withholding doing it for some malevolent reason. We can't work out which. I think they are 80% incompetent. These are sort of very dumb people. Particularly, look at the ministers, Fikile, Beketele, Naledi Pandor. These are thick people, despite Naledi's plummy English accent. She's a dumbass. And all of them are very, very stupid. But there's a level of malevolence that comes through the ideology, the NDR, the training in this, under the Soviets. And it is just beyond, it's becoming clear now. They cannot do service delivery. They're too stupid to run anything. But what will come through by 2029 is how corrupt they are. And you used a very important expression, Byron. You said, they really don't care. Well, I had a chat to Professor William Gumedi this morning. It'll come out probably in a week or so. And he's the guy that's written many, many papers since 1996 on BEE. And he said he's only been noticed this year. He's done about 10 papers on BEE doesn't work. But I said, at least you're noticed now, and it's got huge momentum. And my question to him was, if you look at all the work you've done, factually, it proves BEE doesn't work. It's a drain, it's destructive, it impoverishes the country, and it only benefits 100 people who rip the country off to R1 trillion. Does the ANC not care about this? And the answer is they just don't care. They don't care if people are poor. They don't care if people are uneducated, because they can bribe them with a social grant and make them dependent. And they don't care that in every single KPI, every single metric, the ANC, have destroyed this country. They don't care. They're just there to break so they can steal. And this assassination of Witness D, with whistleblowers discredited and killed along the way, is, I think, the final straw. I think this is the final straw. The ANC is on its way out, and the sooner the better.
Yeah,
well, I don't disagree with that, Rob. And for Byron, a couple points on that. Number one, it's something I've told people for many, many years. All that matters to the African National Congress is loyalty to Luthuli House. That trumps everything. As long as you're loyal to Luthuli House, they'll cover anything up. We still have resolution on the asbestos deal in the Free State, or the Vreda dairy farm scandal, or the 168 criminal charges against Zandile Gumeda, or Ace Magashulis, in the Free State, and on all these other things. PP, it's only the low officials and apparatchiks who get hit. So loyalty to Luthuli House trumps everything. As long as you're loyal, you can get away with anything. And as far as Professor Gumeda, you're right, Rob. I mean, most people never heard of him. I mean, he chaired the 2023 multi-party charter, which I covered. I was there covering this journalist. And I was talking about him and a couple of the other journalists, like, who's he? I'm like, you don't know who that is? I mean, that shows you just how disconnected the reporters are in South Africa. Now, as far as Witness D, I don't really care whether he wanted protection or not. There's such a thing as protective custody. You take someone into custody to protect them, whether they want it or not. This is a disgrace on the part of the Shlanga Commission, everyone involved with it. And I wonder the condition of the other people out there. This is This is malicious. I mean, it's not just incompetence. I mean, but look what happened in the 2021 on July 4th, 2021, when he didn't show up, when Zuma didn't show up at the escort detention facility. On the 8th, they started torching cars at the Moon River Travel Plaza, and nobody saw this. I'm sitting in America, and on June 29th, I predicted almost exactly what was going to happen. Where was the criminal intelligence? Where's the national intelligence? It's ineptitude. It's a don't care, like Rob said. And it's shameful. The country is completely gone. The people in power are just doing it for themselves. It's obvious. And the last thing I want to cover quick is Rob mentioned, there's going to be a shift away from the ANC. I think we're going to see in the next election, unless something changes dramatically, is just even lower levels of voter turnout, lower than 30%. And I'm not convinced the DA is going to go anywhere. I mean, if what I've seen anecdotally is indication, there are a lot of people angry at the DA because NHI, Bella, the lack tax, and EWC and their quietness, and then the brilliance of the agricultural ministers let foot and mouth disease spread like syphilis across the country. Just saying.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, like, Chris, everything you just mentioned in that final moment. I saw headlines this morning of Cyril saying that he's going to double down on NHI. It's going to be implemented. He's going to double down on EWC. He's going to double down on BE. He's going to double down on everything. So I don't think they've learned their lesson. But I want to bring up something also, keeping into the theme of all the horrible things that the ANC is doing. Byron Shepherd actually did a video on this last week, and I would really like for him to surmise what this topic for us, because I think it's extremely important what they're trying to push through here. And it's called the Apartheid Bill, which was brought to fruition by the Al Jamaa political party and some other smaller political parties in the GNU. Byron, would you mind just giving us I encourage everybody to go watch the full video that Byron did, but maybe you can give us a brief summary of what the dangers are and what this bill is.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand it's not actually a bill. So it's a notice of intention to draft the bill. So it's kind of like the first steps before a bill is drafted. But the notice of intention already received in the typical fashion, the seal clap of the EFF and the ANC and the usual, super lefties. But the Apartheid Bill effectively is meant to codify some 1970s rules or laws around, apartheid and that kind of thing. It's quite loose in terms of what it does, but what's actually important is that what it effectively does is attempts to codify these international statutes within South African law, but then kind of progress them a little bit further. So what the proposed bill is meant to say is that if you support an apartheid regime, that you yourself are therefore complicit in crimes of apartheid, I suppose, discrimination. And that makes it effectively a criminal act. So the idea is meant to be, right, what is the actual intention behind the bill? Remember, it's coming from the Islamist Al Jamaa. Al Jamaa is very clear what they feel on certain things. Obviously, it's a Free Palestine organization and what. But effectively, what it's meant to do is to criminalize support of Israel. So if you say something like, I don't actually think there's a genocide going on in Israel, maybe the ICJ case is a little bit of a stretch. That's in itself, just by saying that, that's a criminal offense. So it's meant to police the rights of association. I can't associate with anybody who may consider themselves to be Zionist, right? Anybody who has Zionist suggestions. Now, you have to tie that in with certain other things that are happening in the country. If you've been following any of the news out of UCT has been attempting to criminalize Zionism too. So what they've done is they've had a council meeting where they've tried to exclude all forms of Zionism from the campus. Now, Zionism itself Zionism itself, the word, is basically now just a pseudonym for Jews. You got to remember that at its base level, if you ignore all understandings of what Zionism means, at its base level, it basically means that Jews should be allowed their own homeland. That's it. That's what it means. Jews should be allowed their own homeland. The end. What is that homeland? Well, it's Israel. There's nothing more to it. You can't have any other discussion. So that in itself, by me saying, yeah, I think Jews should have their own homeland, according to the Apartheid Bill, would be a criminal activity. Now, that in itself is really problematic, because once you understand how you can criminalize association, let's say I say something like, I really think that South Africa should side with America. We like the Western Hemisphere. Under this law, if they determined that America was an apartheid state, it would be down to the whims of the government to declare it, then ultimately I could be subject to criminal proceedings on the basis that in itself could be support of an apartheid state. The government shouldn't be allowed to police speech, and they shouldn't be allowed to police association or support of what my good conscience tells me I should support.
Excellent. And thank you for rounding that up so nicely for us. I'd like to get to Rob and Chris's thought. Let's start with Chris. Chris, I don't know if you've heard about this proposed bill, but yeah, your thoughts on this one.
I have heard about it, and I did touch on my news report, but I didn't do an individual brief on it. So the problem with this is manifest in so many different ways. Number one, this is an effort to take a subjective definition of apartheid, which applied to South Africa, and it was separate development. They're trying to bootstrap the Rome Statute, which was drafted by American lawyers to create the International Criminal Court. They're trying to bootstrap crimes against humanity, which is the actual criminal act, but that's also very subjective in many respects. It's self-evident in some respects, but it's a very weak legal approach. And as Byron touched on, this undermines the South African Constitution, specifically Section 16, which guarantees free speech and freedom of expression, and Section 18, which guarantees freedom of association, which is something they're trying to do to AfriForum and to the members of the DA, as well as the Solidarity Movement who came to the United States, trying to impinge upon their freedom of association or freedom of movement, which is another section. But they tried this nonsense about 18, 20 years ago with the anti-mercenary law, which under that act that they were putting together, anyone who was part of a so-called liberation movement, like the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, who tortured and murdered people, they would never be charged with a crime. But if you worked in Iraq as a contractor for security services, you would be considered a mercenary, and they could punish you. The idea is, once again, tied back to what Marco Rubio recently called racial grievances and racial revenge, and that's just part of it. They're trying to punish people specifically. In this case, they're trying to punish South African Jews and anyone who speaks up on behalf of Israel. Now, as far as the notion of the South African government having the temerity or the gall to charge their nationals for crimes in someone else's sovereign territory, that's an interesting concept also. But it's not exactly unique. Germans many years ago, because the horrific number of cases of German perverts going to Thailand and sleeping with minor children, the Germans actually put a national act in that allows them to charge German nationals for committing sex crimes in Thailand. I think that's very weak from my perspective legally. I don't think the Germans have any right to charge a German national for crime committed on someone else's sovereign territory, because in effect, it undermines the sovereignty of that nation. I understand why they did it, but I don't agree with it. Now, we have something in the United States which puts us very uncompetitive against the Chinese, for example. We can charge U.S. businessmen for paying bribes abroad, but that's because their companies are based in the United States, and therefore we can charge them with a crime because it's tied to their business back here. So that's a little bit different, not quite the same. But it really, this will grant extraterritorial jurisdiction to the South African courts, and you can't even trust them with domestic jurisdiction. Why are you going to trust them with international to prosecute individuals, South African citizens or residents or persons present in South Africa for apartheid crimes? So if I came to South Africa and I used my freedom of expression, they could actually charge me for a crime because they didn't like what I had to say. It's subjective. And some idiots like Al Jamaa or the ANC should never have this power. And this is something the South African public needs to wake up to, because this is an effort to undermine your constitution. Section 25 has already been eviscerated by unconstitutional expropriation without compensation act, and it's not being challenged at the moment, at least not successfully. We're waiting for it to come up. But this is another issue, and this is your basic rights. These are human rights. These are natural rights, and they have no right to impinge upon them. And the South African public needs to be aware of it before you wind up living in a fascist dictatorship, which is right around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do understand there's some organizations that are allowing for public comment on this bill, which I encourage everybody to. I think DRSA is doing it. I think Free SA is going to jump on it. I think some other organizations also going to jump on it. And so, have your voices heard and oppose it. But before we move on, Rob,
But
I mean,
hey, Joe, but it's only 5. You only have 5 days left. You have till December 14th. This is typically what they do.
True.
You got 5 days
Yeah.
to comment. That's not much time. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Chris. That's a very good point. So, ladies and gentlemen, please try and just Google DRSA, Free SA. You'll find the place where you can comment very easily and leave your comments there. Rob, I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Byron and Chris have done a beautiful job on this. 2 points. One is that Al-Jamar is a nasty, evil ANC proxy, bluntly. And secondly, if you've got 144 primarily anti-white, but also many anti-colored, anti-Indian race laws on our books, then the ANC is an apartheid organization. So where do you differentiate the one from the other?
Here.
Yeah,
I mean, that unfortunately becomes the problem, right? Because what effectively happens underneath the legislation is that any state that you decide is an apartheid state is and support thereof is, well, it's criminal. So let's say, as an example, if Orania is classed by the state as an apartheid state or an apartheid area, if AfriForum says that they support Orania's right to exist, that, according to the act, would be criminal. You can see how loosely this would go, right? Every single time. We've recently seen in the Human Rights Commission that there was an area around the one of the beaches, the beach locations in the Western Cape, where they said that the homes around it were too white, and that was synopsis of apartheid, and that some of the homes should be expropriated in order to redistribute them in order to get better racial parity. I covered that on one of my shows too, but I think so did Chris. So the reality is, like, every time we make that determination that something is apartheid, remember that Rob saying, for example, no, it's not, that's criminal.
Yeah, no, you're right about that, Rob. And here's the thing. Yeah, or Byron, excuse me. It's early morning. Sorry, Byron. The thing about that is that what's going on at Hartbeespoort right now is a perfect example of that. Yeah, Hartbeespoort has a situation where the captured South African Human Rights Commission went there and actually admitted it's not a racist town, but then they contradicted everything they said, and even on television said that we're going to encourage the authorities to use every tool at their disposal now for redress, not for land claims, not for historical rights and wrongs, but for redress, because some people don't live as well as other people. So they're going to encourage the authorities. And remember, EWC is at the national, provincial, and municipal level. And so at the provincial level, they could come and say, we're going to take this land, expropriate your home because someone else doesn't have a nice home. Now that sounds like a wild expansion and lunacy, but it's actually what they're encouraging. They're encouraging expropriating people's property because someone doesn't live as well as someone else. And this is exactly what you're getting at there, Byron. So they'll call it, well, it's apartheid, so it's a crime, so we'll take it because they committed a criminal act. This is insane. And people need to be aware of this.
And I think Chris has raised a very important point. You know that spineless Cyril said, well, we're signing EWC into law, expropriation without compensation, but it's never really going to be used. Well, it's being used, and it's going to increasingly be used at the municipal level. Maybe not by national government, by municipal government. So by the end of next year, we better have all the big metros, non-ANC, and then DA and the good guys running as many of them as possible, but also the smaller metros as well. It's urgent, and that's 12 months from now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to be a little bit controversial, I suppose. Why not? And say that there are parts of the Expropriation Act that I actually agree with. If you drive around many areas, you can see state decay everywhere. Certainly in PE, there are a number of buildings in PE where the building itself is collapsing. In Jeffreys Bay, there's a very notorious home there. There's a home that's built right in the middle of the most expensive suburb in J-Bay. It's half built. And then the person who was building it died, and it went into deceased estate. And I don't know who the family is. Nobody knows who the family is. They probably immigrated. And the home has been sat there now going into squalor for nearly 10 years. The home is half falling apart. The squatters in it, and it's like in the most affluent suburb of J-Bay. So in that situation, I actually support expropriation without compensation because the family cannot be found. People have been trying to find the family for 10 years, and the property is going into wreck and ruin. And there are certain instances where it's now problematic to the people that live around there. So,
Byron, can't you apply that to pretty much the whole of PE? If you drive down the coast, it's like, it's a shock.
Yeah, Rob's not wrong. Rob's not wrong. And, you know, the main central business district in PE is a good example of that. It is now crumbling. It's falling apart. There's a number of Nigerians living in the buildings, and they are Nigerians. And the reality is that the owner of it is like 85, and he moved abroad, and he don't give a flying monkeys about any of it because he made his money way back when. He bought the buildings in the 1960s, and you know, at the end of the day, the buildings are going to wreck and ruin. Now, that has a detrimental impact on the main central business district of PE. Nobody wants to be there because it's a crime-ridden hellhole. So, Rob, you're not wrong. But the reality, as a lawyer, I'm saying this now with my lawyer hat on, you never draft a law on the basis of best intentions. The Expropriation Act is a good example. I'm saying here, I actually agree with some of the things that the bill can do. But you have to understand that any law that gets drafted has to be drafted for the worst intentions. In other words, you have to put all the safeguards in place that stop the most extreme or the worst case scenario ever. And the problem in South Africa, and maybe it's a legacy from the end of apartheid where the previous law drafters left the country or retired, or maybe it's a failing in the education system. Who knows? You can speculate on that. But the majority of the laws that get proposed in this country have zero safeguards. And the way that they get drafted is they are so loose that it's actually down to the courts to determine what the bill actually says. And that is the problem. So the Expropriation Act is one of the key examples when everybody told Parliament it is so loose and bill rubbish, it is going to be misused. You could say, well, Cyril says he's never going to use it. Cyril says this, Cyril says that. Who cares? If Julius Malema wins the next election, what's he going to do with it? Can he just wholesale expropriate the whole country? And the answer is, well, yes, he can do it underneath the public interest clause.
Byron, you can take that analogy, and I agree with it, the best and worst intention analogy, and apply it to the Constitution. The Constitution, we always say we're the best Constitution in the world, but it never took into account having morons or gangsters or moronic gangsters, the ANC, in charge. You end up with Zuma and Ramaphosa. I mean, what's the point of a constitution like that if you've got gangster Zuma, moron, spineless moron Cyril in charge? Look what's happened.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Rob.
And one of the key areas where you can see that very thing actually occur in our constitution is around the redress clause. Because the redress clause is an open-ended clause. And that in itself is fundamentally problematic because it says that the ANC, the government of the day, must take active steps to redress or create opportunities for the previously disadvantaged. Okay, cool. At what point in time does that fall away? 10 years? 20 years? 30 years? 100 years? 1,000 years? Like at what point in time does the redress clause no longer apply? Because there's no checks and balances put in place.
Can I quickly mention something off-piece but relevant? You know, Trump, before he was elected, one of the best things I ever heard him say was, if anyone wants to introduce a new law, they have to get rid of 2 old ones. Well, do you know what the ratio is?
It's about 10 to 1 the other way.
Yeah,
but I look at we lost Rob there a second, so I'll jump in while Rob dropped off. So this is the problem when you invite attorneys to the conversation. So we're gonna have to convene the People's Court here now. We're convening the People's Court. People's Court's in session. Attorneys know the law, and that's the problem. They're not libertarians, so to speak. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, this has been hit spot on by both Rob and Byron have talking about this. The problem with this is that you have to have safeguards, and they're not there. You know, and we've got idiots, as Rob is talking about. We got idiots like, you know, the ANC. The only person the ANC that's telling the truth is, ironically, Paul Mashatile. He says, when you tell me nil compensation, I take that to mean nothing, and we're not going to pay people anything when we take their land. He actually said that, so at least he told the truth. But you've got the cackling hyena from the DA, D. McPherson, walking around going, nil compensation is something. Really? What planet are you on, man? Your name is McPherson. You don't understand English? No, look, the problem here is no safeguards, and I would never entrust this authority to anyone. The fact that there's a constitution, like Rob indicated, you could talk about the most liberal constitution in the world, but no one follows it. It's completely ignored. It's a gangster state. The rule of law has disappeared a long time ago, and the law is used to abuse people. Yesterday, I interviewed Peter Altenbach from the Hot Peace Port Economic Forum, and he's another example of a South African who brought up laid a charge for criminal activity, a legitimate charge, and then counter charges were filed against him to drag him into court, to drain him of his money, to force him to spend money on lawyers, and string this thing out. I mean, we still haven't prosecuted Jacob Zuma for crimes he was charged with 25 years ago. I mean, the whole thing is a joke. There is no law. And this is the problem when you introduce laws like this. Byron's spot on with this, and so is Rob. But unless you have safeguards and you have competent people, this is what you get. I mean, look, even in America, we say the law was abused against Trump. Letitia James is a criminal. She needs to be wearing a jumpsuit. She's an absolute criminal. Alvin Bragg is a criminal. These aren't even criminal acts, what Trump did. And then they violate our Constitution by hitting with a $455 million bail. I mean, that's excessive. That was a violation, direct violation of the Bill of Rights, and yet they got away with it. And so, I mean, even a country like this, our safeguards at times are weak. You have no safeguards in South Africa. Nobody is safe. Nobody.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, Byron, I just want to jump in very quickly to add to your point about laws and vagueness. It's not just the Expropriation Act, it's also the PI Act. The PI Act was very poorly written, and like you said, with the how laws are written in South Africa, where the courts have to determine definitions and so on and so forth, and interpret clauses. The PI Act is exactly the same. The courts had to determine and come to a decision with what a home is, because it's not clearly defined in the PI Act. So when you put a tarp over your head on someone else's property, you're not allowed to take it down because that's deemed a home, because that was the court's interpretation. And this goes to our point that everybody's saying that, like, yes, there might be some aspects of some legislation that we can all agree with, but at the same time, we did not, or nobody predicted, albeit some may have, you can argue that, that a corrupt organization, syndicate, would be in charge of South Africa and purposefully, in my opinion, make some of these laws so that they can find loopholes and criminality and corruption can thrive. Sorry, Byron, you were saying.
Yeah, so look, a big problem that we inevitably have here, right, is that you're saying nobody could predict this. Well, that's the whole point of legislative drafting. When you draft forms of legislation, you have to predict the bad guys are going to use it. That's how legislative drafting works. So in most normal places, we'll say, well, the legislator has to come up with all these safeguards, all these definitions. Look at an actual act. What's the first 3 pages? Definitions. How does it apply? What's the intention? You go through it. A lot of the time in South Africa, in the South African legal landscape, we don't do that. We miss a lot of the key points out. Maybe it's colonial. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it's like decolonizing. The idea is that it goes off to the judiciary. The judiciary is meant to interpret it. What you inevitably find is, like in South Africa, in the high courts, our high courts are retarded. I'm sure there's some really good judges in the high courts in South Africa, but there's a hell of a lot of retards too. And so what you end up finding is that sometimes they come up with the most bizarre bull rubbish kind of comments on whatever law is in place. And it ends up having to be escalated to the constitutional courts. The problem is that as the state has got more involved in appointing the judicial appointees, in some instances, and I'm going to use qualifiers because it's not all, but in many instances, the very individuals who take these positions are, to be honest, just stupid. I mean, if you've seen some of the individuals that applied for the constitutional justice positions, some of these people couldn't spell. And these are individuals who are then meant to be reinterpreting our laws and applying it to the Republic. You can't have that, because in some instances, what you have is you have incompetent law drafters and then incompetent law interpreters. And that leaves you with a very long-term problem. Coming back to the situation then of Jacob Zuma, just on a very quick topic. I actually liked Jacob Zuma, not because of what he did. I like Jacob Zuma because he told us to our face what he was going to do, laughed at us and said, ha, 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 I'm going to steal. And at least you knew what you were dealing with. Like, none of us on this stream were like, oh, we're surprised that Zuma did what he did. Like, he told us to our faces what he was going to do. At least he was honest.
Fair point.
It's like Barack Obama in America. He told us exactly what it was all about. He wanted to fundamentally change America, and almost no one listened. I listened, and I warned people, but I was a serving military officer, so I couldn't go on air. But no, yeah, it's when people tell you who they are, you need to believe them. You need to listen to what they're saying if they tell you that. But you talk about these appointments, Byron. There's no wonder that idiots are appointed. I mean, Julius Malema serves on the Judicial Service Commission. He's a convicted felon. Come on, seriously? He's still in Parliament. He should be removed from Parliament. He's been convicted.
Yeah.
We're waiting his judgment now. I mean, not judgment, waiting his sentencing now. But he's a convicted criminal.
There's no actual parameters to determine what exactly is the qualifier to get appointed to many of these individuals in the democratic state. Mm-hmm. The reality is that the qualifier to appoint an individual usually is votes. And fundamentally, it's why I personally, and I'm pretty vocal on this, I don't support the democratic system. I don't think the democratic system works because it's like we like to think that the democratic system as we see it today, it's the first time it's been tried. And look how wonderful it is. Democratic system has been tried like at various points throughout history, and it always fails for the exact same reason. And that is that the reality is it usually revolves or diverts or ends up becoming nothing more than majoritarianism. And the majoritarianism usually is a bunch of individuals who are just too stupid or retarded to understand what exactly is it that they're voting for. This is chickens that end up voting for KFC. Right?
It's the lowest you're right. It's the lowest common denominator gamed by the political elite. You're there just to steal, and they pretend to the lowest common denominator they're looking after them, but they're just looking after themselves. That's where we are in South Africa today: political cronyism and capitalism. But hopefully, we can get rid of this mob relatively soon. I mean, anyone still voting for the ANC, you are a criminal or a moron. I've boiled it down to two.
But this is back to Byron's point. This is why our system is unique. Our system is a union of sovereign states, which was set up on the basis, has been corrupted a bit since they changed the 17th Amendment, 16th, 17th Amendment. They changed, 17th Amendment. So they've corrupted a little bit by, it used to be that the voters didn't pick the senators because it was the most important part of the legislature. The state legislatures picked them, and the voters didn't have direct vote there. That's why we have the Electoral College. Democracy is not a good system. I personally never claimed it is, because it's tyranny of the majority. 50 plus 1 decide if we want slavery, we're going to have slavery. Think about that. That's what people need to think about. That's what democracy is. True democracy, like in towns in New England, is not a lovely thing. It's unmanageable if you get above a couple hundred people, a couple 1,000 people. It just does not work. That's why you have to have a system that has safeguards. And we have many safeguards. And we thought foolishly in America that our safeguards worked. But we've seen in the past 15 years that they don't work. We've seen federal institutions abusing us, but that's because our government was allowed to get big with the 16th Amendment, which allowed for income tax. Once the government could tax your income with the constitutional amendment, then they started growing in power and influence. And now they're a Leviathan, and they just can run roughshod. They can use the Federal Bureau of Incompetence to investigate people for no reason. They can bankrupt you with lawsuits and abuse that. The FBI can spy on people and violate the laws, and no one is held to account. So in a country that put up safeguards by our founders, in a different epoch, a different era, when this sort of capabilities weren't there, is a system that's showing to be wanting today. So I personally have never been a fan of democracy as such. You have to have safeguards, and I've always liked our system, but I've become a little bit concerned about it in the past decade because the abuse is rampant, and every time we turn a stone over, we find out it's worse than we thought it was. Look at what's coming out now. It's just absolutely insane about how these people abuse power in America. And if they could do it to Trump, they could do it to anybody. I mean, that guy's a billionaire,
I kind of fundamentally don't agree with a lot of that. And that's not to say that I think you're wrong, Chris. I just have a different viewpoint. So I think democracy only works when you have three things. The first is you need to have an educated population. Like people need to be educated.
Had that. That's it. Alexis de Tocqueville compliment us that farmers and village people and blacksmiths could quote Plato back in the 18th century. We don't have that today.
Yes. 100%. And, if you think about it, like the schooling system as a whole is problematic. But democracy works when you have, one, you have to have educated people. Number two, you have to have informed people. They have to understand exactly what it is that the decision they're making, how it will impact not just them, but their descendants. Quite often, we don't know how the decisions that are made are going to impact us tomorrow morning, let alone for the next 100 years. And the third thing is you need to have a homogeneous society. We all need to have the same ideas, values, and so forth. If we all do that and we have a good idea as to what goes on here, we can have democracy. But the problem is when you live in a multicultural state with competing ideas, the battleground of ideas, as the liberals try to call them, it doesn't work because effectively, I'll use an example. If you go to, and this is factual, you can check the stats. I'm sure there's going to be that one person that's going to say, oh, it's racist. Muslims typically vote at a far greater number than Christians. And when I say far greater, I mean like 5-10 times more. Like in a mosque, the majority of people in a mosque will vote. In a church, 20% maybe will vote. And there's a reason for that, and it's the perception on how democracy works. And many of the Muslims, they see it as their path to power. They understand there's a power dynamic. They need the vote in order to gain power. Now you may ask yourself the question, power for what? Well, they don't really care as long as they're the ones in charge, right? So now we've missed the dynamic of any form of homogeneity. Because the Christians are going to be sitting back there going, we've got the greater numbers, but you're the ones in power. We can see this right across the Western world. We can see it even in the impact in South Africa. The Muslim population here is single digits, but they're the one that have the majority of the political power. Why? Because they vote in those kind of institutions. That's why we started this whole stream off discussing the Apartheid Bill. We see the same thing occurring in England. Democracy in its current format doesn't work whilst you have multiculturalism, an uneducated population, and a media system or people that just don't know. Now, that just don't know also needs to be compounded into the fact that the majority of people don't know, not because it's just the media's fault, but they don't want to know. How many people actually are interested in politics? The majority of people aren't, because they say, I'm not interested. It doesn't affect me. Okay, well, you might not be interested in politics, but politics are very much interested in you. Right. And that's the old saying. So you can't ask people to vote on things that, quite frankly, they don't care about. You know what they care about? Whether or not they can get to work, or their car starts, or whether or not the order that they're doing is going to get fulfilled, or the kid gets into school, or wins his gala. Right. They don't care about the majority of the political stuff. So in this format, many individuals naturally will ask me, well, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is monarchy. Except monarchy requires that an individual has been bred or raised to be the smartest of the smart, that he's also compassionate and has a love for his nation such that he wishes to see his nation prosper. We don't have that either. We don't have any monarchies in South Africa that any of us would turn around and say, well, why don't we get them to run the place?
What about King Rob? What about King Rob? I'd take that job for 100 days. Out of your 100 days,
I thought it was supposed to be King Roman, but Byron, I don't think we disagree. I mean, I was trying not to steal all the oxygen and take up all the time on that, because you've fleshed out some of the points I have. The one point you make there that's interesting, the third point, is homogeneity. I mean, you have societies that politically work pretty well, like Japan. It's overwhelmingly Japanese, although technically they're really just Koreans. That's 1,000 years removed. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But the myth of America is that it's multicultural and that it's a melting pot, when in reality, the key to success has been assimilation for centuries. People come here and assimilate. And even as late as the time I was born, this country was 89% Anglo-Saxon white and 90+% Christian. And we accommodated Jews. We had some Muslims here. We had others. And there were Black Americans and there were Native Americans, but overwhelmingly, it was a white country. But it was all white men who had beards like this in the 1960s who changed their immigration law and changed the tide. And the country now we're hearing about white fragility, but it's the white people that let this happen. But we have a lot of these problems in no small measure because of this divergence of homogeneity. Homogeneity is spreading, it's breaking apart. it's not working so well. There are very few societies that are multicultural that succeed. Switzerland is one, but let's be honest. I mean, the Swiss Italians, the Rede Romanche, the Germans, and the French are the same damn people. They just speak different languages. They all live in the mountains. They all like to yodel, and they all like to eat their chocolates. I'm being a little silly there, but they call themselves different. They're not really different. So I don't think we differ that much, Byron. I think we pretty much agreed. I just didn't take it out that far. Your 3 points are very valid, and I agree with 100%. And it's Rob's turn.
Nick Groves has given us a great donation, and he's also asked a question. Joe, I'm doing your job here.
I was just about to bring it up, Rob.
Bring it up.
All right. Yes, I actually wanted to get to some of the super chats that have come in. We've got Nicholas Grove, who gave a 14 Rand super chat earlier saying, I'm adding to Rob's billions here. Thank you so much for the 14 Rand super chat or sausage chat. And he also gave another 14 Rand super chat. Thank you so much for Nicholas Groves. And he asks a very important question, guys, and we'll get everybody's opinion on this as we close off the show because we only got 10 minutes. So make the answer short and sweet. Will the ANC leave? Go peacefully if voted out.
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. They already have. They've already, melded into the GNU, and they'll be gone. They will be gone. They're not the threat. The ANC are not the threat anymore. They're a disparate group of gangsters and thieves and morons and lunatics and Cinderella clowns. They're no longer an entity of any note. They're BEE guys who've been gorging at the trough, will head for cover. The gangsters will be hiding. I mean, they're falling apart. If there is a threat, it's probably Zuma. His dumbass daughter's trying to create a little military entity. They sent people to Russia for training, and all those people ended up in the trenches getting smacked by the Ukrainians. So how dumb is she? How dumb are the Zumas? They're really classic. But they're a nasty, nasty mob. I don't worry about the ANC. They're gone and they'll leave. They'll go running with their tenders between their legs.
For me personally, just to address that other super chat that just came in, it says multiculturalism cannot work in a country within 11 official languages. So actually there's something here that we talked about, and that is, Rob mentioned it about all the white individuals that vote for all the stupid stuff that ultimately leads to the destruction of the West. I know, Chris, you mentioned it as well. I want to highlight, and this is, again, I'm talking for myself, and it's just my own opinion, but there is a really easy way to fix South Africa, but it doesn't mash with liberal sensibilities. It's one of the reasons I don't consider myself to be a liberal. Number one, you need to breed like rabbits. Number two, your wife needs to stay at home and look after the kids so that the kids are educated in a traditional household. Number three, if you really care about Western values, Judeo-Christian values, you're going to have to go back to a church or a synagogue every week and be observant, even if you don't believe it. If you ask most people to do these three things, they'll say to you no. They'll say, well, can't have lots of kids because can't afford it. I don't really, just Sunday, it's the only time I got for myself. I don't really want to go to church. If you say to them, the wife needs to look after the kids, they're like, what is that, patriarchal? So liberal sensibilities have created the destruction of the West. But the solution is right there. But you have to sacrifice, and you have to make very, very difficult decisions for you and your household. And those decisions may impact your comfort. But if you really want to fix things, you live in a democratic state. It's something that many in the Muslim population understand. That's why the replacement race in the household of a Muslim is usually like between 5 and 7. They understand people is power. If you want to take ownership, you want to take power, you need the numbers. So multiculturalism isn't so much the problem, it's numbers. You need to create a homogeneous society. You need that. Now, homogeneous society, as Chris rightly says, and the US was very good at this. They would say, this is what our founding ideas was. We don't care on your race, but you're going to have to follow these rules. Mm-hmm. And if we all follow the same rules and we're all homogenous in that perspective, get on just fine. And the US did get on just fine. Where it all fell apart is when all the leftists come in and go, well, you've got your rules and we got our rules, and let's all just like agree that we'll just get along. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So there is an easy fix to all of this, but it's something that most people are too lazy to actually adopt.
But it requires a reset and it requires engagement. As far as the ANC, I agree with Rob. The ANC is not the threat. The ANC is imploding, and it's been imploding for some time. There's an instructive lesson next door on South Africa's border in Botswana. The Botswana Democratic Party ruled that country since its inception in 1966, and arguably ruled it well for decades, and kept corruption at a very low parochial level. Wasn't much of anything. But they got old, gray, lazy, and incompetent, and they allowed their talent base to slip away in the party. And it became, by the time Masisi took over the country, a party that was disconnected from the population and fell apart. And they were resoundingly turned down at the last poll. And unfortunately, socialists have taken over now. They're not any better. But the BDP became a party that couldn't function around the country anymore. The ANC is in the same boat. And there are like three major factions inside the ANC competing with each other. Right now, they are not capable of doing anything. They do have the sole discretion for the use of force legally, but the problem with the ANC is that they can't respond. Look at how they responded to July 2021. The army was not prepared, even though I cautioned people for a week that they need prepared. No rehearsals, no resources, no ammunition, no water cannons, no keep nodes protected in KZN or in Soweto. And then when it fell apart, they sent the army in. They didn't even have rations. They got in line at the few pick and pays and checkers that weren't destroyed or torched, and they jumped to the front of the queue while people were waiting in line for 2 days to get food because they couldn't even feed their soldiers. They don't have the state apparatus to control. South Africa could go up like this in a day because if people realize the state doesn't have control, it's going to be just like West Africa, and that's the danger here. It's not the ANC. The danger, in my view, is people realize that, hey, it's like watching the John McClane New York when he's in New York there, the character that Bruce Willis played, and he's like, this kid's running down the street and he goes, hey, you want to go to Juvie or Snickers? He goes, hey, look around, man, the cops are into some shit. It's like Christmas here. Yeah, that's exactly right. The cops are into some crap. And we see it, literally speaking, in South Africa. The cops are into some crap. So go ahead and steal your Snicker bar, South Africa, because that's what we're looking for. It's coming. But no, the ANC is not the threat. They're just not capable of being a threat. And I think that's the point here.
Yeah. Before we end off, guys, we got like 3 minutes. So, Chris, there was a super chat that came in. I think it's for you, Mark Myberg, 35 Rand super chat. Thank you so much for the 35 Rand super chat. Is the USA security bill fake news? I see no deep dive anywhere. So, Chris, just very briefly, in less than 2 minutes, if you can, just address that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was. Initially, it was asked to Byron. I'm not sure what that is. Is that a South African bill? Because the only thing I'm aware of in the U.S., there's two things taking place. We have a national security strategy, which was just released, and it devotes all 3 paragraphs to Africa. Actually, a pretty good approach to it. Is that what we're talking about right there? Arresting human rights violations. No, that's not it. That's the February 7th executive order. So I'm not sure what that's talking about. We do have two pieces of legislation. There are currently 3, actually. They're sitting in the House and the Senate. The one from last year, a bipartisan bill, which hasn't gone anywhere, has even got a committee that seeks to look at the relationship strategic with South Africa with a view towards punishing and sanctioning senior officials. That was from February last year. Now, this year, Ronnie Jackson, former personal physician to Obama and to Trump, a retired captain from the Navy, a doctor, he has put in that bill that is looking to do the same thing, but it's not bipartisan. He did with James, a Republican from Michigan. And then Senator Kennedy in the Senate has now come on, and Senator Kennedy has a Senate bill that does the same thing. So I'm not sure what security bill we're talking about. They aren't really security. They're about the geostrategic relationship between U.S. and South Africa with a vision towards punishing people for being miscreants. But that I'm not aware of any security bill. Maybe someone can add in there, but and I can address it. But those are the 2 things I know about. But the national security strategy, every administration comes out with it. They by law have to do it within 6 months. And none of them ever achieved that. This one done by Trump about 10 months in is actually pretty fast. But he knew what he was doing. He was planning on this for a long time. So I'm not sure. I'm sorry if I didn't answer, but without more information, I really can't go any further.
All right. Well, gents, it's pretty much the end of the hour. I promised it was only going to be an hour, so here we go. If you guys very quickly, each of you want to say what you got going on in your lives and give a bit of a quick cheers, what you got coming up. We'll start with Rob and then go to Byron, then Chris. Rob.
So I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday, a Merry Christmas, and let's hope there's light at the end of the tunnel next year.
Byron.
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's important to remember that, hey, Rob, Hanukkah starts on the 14th of December and goes for 8 days. Hanukkah is the festival of lights. And you have to remember that it's the lighting of the menorah. The oil shines lights for all of us, right? And unfortunately, we have to remind ourselves why we do what we do, and that is that the best, as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And at the end of the day, we all need to keep talking about what's going on in the state. As I said earlier, the majority of people have no interest in politics. It's important for all of us to normalize what we're talking about. Normalize it with your friends, normalize it with your family, let them talk to others, spread the message amongst all of you. If enough people start talking about this, we'll soon get rid of the problems that we have. The only reason that we still have these problems is there's not enough light, there's not enough sunlight. So help spread the word. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to Chris, subscribe to Joe, subscribe to Rob, and obviously subscribe to myself. But other than that, have a great holiday, everybody, and we'll hope to see you in the new year.
Chris?
Well, great words from both of them. Thank you both very much. Byron kind of stole my thunder a little bit there. This season. I'm not a season's greetings guy. I'm a Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas guy. I say that very clearly every year. So Happy Hanukkah and Merry Christmas to all the viewers out there and those listening. Really do appreciate it. And Byron touches on something here. If you're not voting, if you don't participate, you're part of the problem. And if you complain about it, you're part of the problem. That's the bottom line here. I go to township meetings here. I don't make them all because I have other responsibilities, but I go and 6, 8 people show up, and then they want to know why they're building massive warehouses right next to our schools, and they have semi-trailers driving, where kids are coming out of school. Well, that's because you didn't participate, and the people that are trying to make money are the ones sitting there, and they did what they wanted to do. So if you don't participate, if you don't vote, you're part of the problem. And you can complain all day, but it won't change anything. 38% of people showing up in elections last time is a disgrace. The DA likes to talk about how they gain votes. They didn't gain votes. They simply lost votes. That's reality. Anyway, so thank you all very much. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas. Good to see everybody. I enjoyed this conversation, even though I was up at 4 o'clock to do it.
Thanks again, Chris, for doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here. Our last live stream for 2025. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you in the new year. Happy holiday. Happy New Year. We'll see you at the next one. Your Truth Report is in.